The Wailing Widow of Briar Hollow. Briar Hollow was a forgotten village, tucked away in a dense forest where the trees grew unnaturally tall and the sky was rarely visible. The villagers avoided a particular clearing in the woods, a place where no grass grew and an ancient stone well stood at its center. They called it Widow's Rest, named after the legend of Eleanor Grey, a woman whose grief cursed the land. Centuries ago, Eleanor's husband, a woodsman, disappeared in the forest. When he didn't return, she searched for him for weeks, eventually succumbing to despair. It was said she threw herself into the well, cursing the village for abandoning her. No one ventured near Widow's Rest after dusk, for they said the well was haunted by Eleanor's wailing ghost, eternally searching for her lost love. The curse was considered mere folklore until Martha, the daughter of a farmer, went missing. She was last seen walking into the woods to gather herbs. When the search party ventured into the forest, they found her basket overturned near the clearing, but Martha was nowhere to be found. That night, the villagers heard it, the mournful wail of a woman, echoing through the woods. It was a sound so full of grief and rage that even the bravest men locked their doors and prayed for dawn. By morning, another villager had vanished, a young shepherd named Thomas. His flock was discovered huddled at the edge of the clearing, bleeding in terror. The elders whispered that the widow's curse had been awakened, but no one dared to investigate further. A week later, a traveling scholar named Victor Holloway arrived in Briar Hollow. He claimed to be a historian, fascinated by local legends. When he heard of the disappearances, he offered to help. "I've encountered such phenomena before," Victor said, producing a weathered journal filled with drawings of supernatural symbols and accounts of similar hauntings. These entities often cling to a tragic event. If we can uncover the truth behind Eleanor's curse, we may be able to lay her spirit to rest. The villagers were hesitant but desperate. They told Victor everything they knew about Eleanor's story, and he set off toward Widow's Rest the next morning, promising to return with answers. Victor spent hours examining the well and the clearing. He found carvings etched into the stones surrounding the well, symbols of loss, betrayal, and vengeance. They hinted at a darker truth. Eleanor had not merely cursed the village out of grief. She had made a pact with something ancient, offering her soul in exchange for vengeance. As Victor peered into the well, he saw movement in the blackness below. A pale hand, thin and skeletal, reached out of the darkness. Startled, he stumbled backward as the faint sound of sobbing began to echo from within. Victor fled the clearing, but returned to the village with grim news. "Eleanor's spirit is bound by something far worse than grief," he explained. "She is a vessel for a malevolent force, and it demands sacrifices to sustain its power." The villagers, terrified, begged Victor to destroy the entity. He devised a plan. They would gather at the clearing with offerings of Eleanor's belongings, artifacts retrieved from her abandoned home, and perform a ritual to sever her bond with the curse. That night, under a blood-red moon, the villagers followed Victor to Widow's Rest. The air was thick and suffocating, and the well seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. Victor began chanting in a language no one recognized, pouring salt around the well and burning Eleanor's belongings in a ceremonial fire. The wailing grew louder, and the ground began to tremble. Then she appeared. Eleanor's ghost emerged from the well, her form twisted and grotesque. Her eyes glowed with hatred, and her voice was a cacophony of grief and fury. "You cannot undo what has been done," she hissed. "You will all suffer for your sins." The villagers watched in horror as tendrils of shadow erupted from the well, snatching people and pulling them into the darkness. Amid the chaos, Victor's chanting grew louder, and for a moment, Eleanor faltered. Her form flickered, and the shadows recoiled. The villagers dared to hope, but then Victor stopped abruptly, a wicked smile spreading across his face. "I must thank you all," he said, his voice calm amidst the screams. "Eleanor's curse was powerful, but it lacked direction. By awakening her with your fear, you've made her stronger than ever. Strong enough to serve me." The villagers stared in disbelief as Victor stepped forward, his journal glowing with the same symbols carved into the well. He had not come to help, he had come to harness Eleanor's power for himself. Eleanor let out an ear-piercing wail, and the shadows surged outward, consuming the clearing and the villagers. Victor laughed as the darkness enveloped him, his voice echoing through the night. "This is only the beginning." By morning, Briar Hollow was silent. The village lay in ruins, its houses abandoned and its fields overgrown. No trace of the villagers remained, save for faint footprints leading toward Widow's Rest. Travelers who passed through the forest spoke of an unnatural stillness and a sense of being watched. Some claimed to hear distant wailing, while others saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. A man with glowing symbols etched into his skin, his eyes burning with dark power. The clearing itself became a forbidden place, but on certain nights, under a blood-red moon, the well would toll like a bell, and the wailing would begin anew. And those who heard it knew that the curse of Briar Hollow had not ended. It had only just begun. The Shadows of Ashenwood. The village of Ashenwood sat on the edge of an ancient forest, its trees blackened and gnarled, as though scorched by a fire long ago. No birds sang there, and no animals dared to tread under its twisted canopy. The villagers avoided the forest, calling it the Cursed Wood. Legends told of the Hollow Ones, shadowy figures said to lurk among the trees. They whispered of travelers who entered the forest, only to return days later, hollow-eyed and speaking in tongues no one understood. Some never returned at all. For decades, the villagers lived in uneasy peace, keeping their distance from the cursed woods. But that peace was shattered when 10-year-old Daniel went missing after wandering too close to the forest's edge. Daniel's parents, frantic with grief, begged the villagers to help search for their son. A small group of men agreed, arming themselves with lanterns and blades before venturing into the forest. The villagers gathered at the edge, watching as the search party disappeared into the shadows. Hours passed, then a full day. By the second night, only one man returned, Eli, the village blacksmith. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched the hilt of his sword. He refused to speak of what he'd seen, but he carried a single chilling message. "They are watching." 3 days later, a stranger arrived in Ashenwood. She was a weathered traveler with striking gray eyes, introducing herself as Mirren Vale. She claimed to be a hunter of the unnatural. When she heard of Daniel's disappearance and the curse of the forest, she insisted on helping. The villagers were reluctant, but had little choice. They shared what they knew, including the stories of the Hollow Ones. Mirren listened intently before asking to see the forest herself. She returned hours later with an ashen face, muttering under her breath. "It's worse than I thought," she said. "This is no ordinary curse. The forest is alive, and it's feeding on your fear. If we don't act, it won't stop at Daniel. It will consume the entire village." Mirren devised a plan to confront the curse. She explained that the Hollow Ones were not spirits but shadows given life, bound to the forest by an ancient ritual. To break their hold, they needed to find the heart tree, the source of their power, and burn it to ash. That night, Mirren, Eli, and 2 other villagers, Marcus and Ruth, entered the forest. The air grew colder with each step, and the shadows seemed to shift and writhe. Whispers echoed around them, calling their names in voices that sounded both familiar and wrong. They found Daniel's shoe near a clearing, but there was no sign of the boy. Instead, they saw carvings etched into the trees, twisted faces screaming silently, their features grotesque and unrecognizable. Finally, they reached the heart tree, a massive, blackened oak with veins of glowing red pulsating through its bark. Beneath it lay Daniel, pale and unmoving, his eyes open but lifeless. Mirren instructed the group to form a circle around the tree and set it alight. She warned them not to break the circle, no matter what they saw or heard. As the flames licked the bark, the forest erupted in chaos. The shadows emerged, twisting, humanoid figures with hollow eyes and clawed hands. They screamed and lunged at the group, but the fire kept them at bay. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, taking on the voices of loved ones. Ruth, overwhelmed by the voice of her late husband, broke the circle and ran toward the shadows. They enveloped her instantly, pulling her into the darkness. Eli and Marcus held their ground, but the fire began to wane. Mirren chanted a spell in a language they didn't understand, her voice trembling. "Almost there," she muttered, sweat pouring down her face. The tree let out a guttural groan, as if alive, and the ground shook violently. Suddenly, the shadows recoiled, drawn into the flames like smoke. The heart tree exploded into ash, and the forest fell silent. The survivors carried Daniel's body back to the village, but he remained unresponsive. Mirren stayed behind, studying the remnants of the heart tree. When she returned at dawn, her expression was grim. "This isn't over," she said. "The ritual was incomplete. The curse was bound not just to the forest, but to a person, someone who carries the mark of the Hollow." The villagers looked at one another in confusion, but then Daniel stirred. His eyes opened, glowing faintly red. Mirren's face fell. "It's him," she whispered. Before anyone could react, Daniel began to laugh, a deep, guttural sound that didn't belong to a child. The shadows rose again, spilling out of the forest and consuming the village in a wave of darkness. Mirren fought valiantly, but the shadows were too many. The last thing she saw was Daniel's face twisted into a cruel smile as he whispered, "You set me free." By sunrise, Ashenwood was gone. The forest had swallowed the village whole, leaving no trace of its people. Travelers who pass by the area speak of a strange, impenetrable fog and whispers that seem to follow them. Some claim to see a boy standing at the edge of the forest, his glowing red eyes piercing through the mist. And at night, when the wind howls, the laughter of a child echoes through the trees, mingling with the mournful cries of the shadows. Ashenwood is now a name spoken in hushed tones, a warning to those who venture too close. The forest watches, and it waits. The Mirror in the Cellar. In the small, rainy town of Blackridge, there was a house no one dared to enter. Known as Hawthorne Manor, it had stood abandoned for over a century, its once grand facade now covered in ivy and rot. Legends told of a family who lived there long ago and vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of dark rituals and a cursed mirror hidden in the cellar. The children of Blackridge dared each other to approach the house, but none ventured inside, except for young Clara one autumn evening. She was found the next morning on the manor's porch, her eyes vacant, her lips whispering the same word over and over. Look. Years passed, and the house remained silent until a newcomer arrived in Blackridge. Amelia Voss, a historian and restorer, bought the property despite the locals' warnings. She was drawn to its history, eager to uncover the secrets buried within its walls. The townsfolk avoided her, but Amelia didn't mind. She spent her days cleaning the house, removing decades of dust and debris. As she worked, she began to hear strange noises, footsteps on the floor above, whispers behind closed doors, and the faint sound of a child laughing. One afternoon, while clearing out the basement, Amelia discovered a hidden door. Behind it was a small cellar, and at its center stood a large, ornate mirror framed in tarnished silver. Its surface was strangely pristine, reflecting the dim light with an unsettling clarity. Amelia moved the mirror to the main hallway, intrigued by its craftsmanship. From the moment it was placed there, the atmosphere of the house seemed to shift. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, and Amelia began to feel as though she was being watched, not by someone in the house, but by something within the mirror. One night, as she passed the mirror, she noticed something chilling. Her reflection did not match her movements. It lingered a second too long, its eyes locked on hers even as she turned away. Despite her growing unease, Amelia couldn't bring herself to remove the mirror. Instead, she began researching its origins, uncovering references to a looking glass of binding, an artifact said to trap souls. Amelia sought help from the town's oldest resident, Martha Halloway, who reluctantly shared the manor's dark past. The mirror belonged to the Hawthorne family, Martha explained. They used it in rituals to summon things. When the family vanished, people believed they'd been taken by the mirror itself. Burn it, Amelia. Destroy it before it's too late. Amelia returned home, determined to get rid of the mirror. But when she approached it with an axe, her reflection smiled, a cruel, knowing grin that froze her in place. The mirror began to hum, its surface rippling like water. A voice echoed in her mind. You brought me here. You cannot undo what has begun. Terrified, Amelia fled the house, spending the night in her car. But when dawn came, she found herself back inside the manor, standing before the mirror. Her reflection looked pale and gaunt, its eyes hollow. Desperate, she called a team of paranormal investigators, who arrived with cameras and equipment. They explored the house, capturing strange phenomena. Lights flickering, cold spots, and voices murmuring Amelia's name. As they filmed the mirror, one investigator leaned too close. His reflection reached out, grabbing him by the throat. He screamed as he was pulled into the glass, disappearing without a trace. The others fled, leaving Amelia alone with the mirror once more. Amelia confronted the mirror, demanding to know what it wanted. The surface shimmered, and a voice whispered, "Freedom." The mirror showed her the truth. The Hawthorne family had used it to communicate with an entity from another realm. But the ritual had gone wrong, and the family had been consumed, their souls bound to the mirror. Now the entity sought a new host to spread its influence beyond the manor. Amelia realized the entity was using her to anchor itself to the world. She decided to end the cycle, even if it cost her life. She poured gasoline throughout the house, igniting it with a single match. The flames roared, engulfing the walls, but the mirror remained untouched, its surface glowing with an eerie light. As the fire consumed the manor, Amelia's reflection stared at her, mouthing two words, "Thank you." The townsfolk watched from a distance as Hawthorne Manor burned to the ground. When the fire finally died, nothing remained but ash and rubble. Amelia was never found, and the town assumed she had perished in the blaze. But weeks later, strange occurrences began to plague Blackridge. Shadows moved on their own, and people reported hearing a faint humming noise. In the ruins of the manor, a child discovered a single, pristine mirror lying among the ashes. Drawn to its surface, he leaned in close. His reflection did not blink. From that day forward, the mirror appeared in different homes throughout the town, bringing darkness and despair wherever it went. Those who gazed into it too long vanished, their souls trapped forever in its glass. Blackridge became a ghost town, its streets silent and its buildings abandoned. And in the center of the ruins stood the mirror, waiting for its next victim. The last person who dared approach it swore they heard a familiar voice whisper from its depths, "You set me free, Amelia. Now they all belong to me."